Welcome back to Zarila HOA Stories, where we share unbelievable, true stories about homeowners and their run-ins with the HOA. If you enjoy hearing about people standing up for their rights on their own property, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and drop a comment below telling me which country or city you're watching from. This story is about a man named Tom Miller, who lives in a quiet, rural neighborhood that falls under an HOA's control. Tom bought his property 10 years ago with the dream of having space, peace, and a bit of land to work on. His house sits on 3 acres with a wide gravel driveway, a red barn, and a view of open fields. He works a regular job during the week, but on weekends, he runs his small ranch. He's got a few chickens, 2 goats named Daisy and Buck, and an old green tractor that he uses for maintenance, plowing snow, and hauling supplies. For the longest time, no one said a word about his tractor. It sat beside his barn, or sometimes in his driveway, when he needed it. Everything was peaceful until one afternoon when he opened his mailbox and found a letter from the HOA. The top of the letter read, "Notice of Violation." Tom thought it was junk mail at first, but as he read, his jaw tightened. According to the HOA, his tractor was considered an industrial vehicle that violated the community appearance standards. The letter stated that he had 7 days to remove it from public view or face daily fines of $100. Tom laughed at first. He thought it must have been a misunderstanding. After all, his nearest neighbor had a boat in their yard, and another had an RV parked right in front of their house for months. So how was his tractor the problem? But the more he thought about it, the more it bothered him. He called the HOA office the next morning. A woman named Carla answered and said, "Yes, sir, tractors fall under our definition of heavy equipment. They can't be parked where they're visible from a street." Tom explained that this was not a construction vehicle. It was a small ranch tractor used for maintaining his land. But Carla only repeated, "We don't make the rules, we just enforce them." Tom hung up the phone, irritated but calm. He decided to attend the next HOA board meeting to clear things up. When the day came, he put on his flannel shirt, grabbed his folder of documents, and drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was full: SUVs, golf carts, even a landscaping trailer hooked to a pickup truck. He walked in and saw a few familiar faces. When the open discussion part began, Tom stood and introduced himself. "I received a violation notice about my tractor," he said, keeping his voice even. "It's used for property maintenance, and it's parked on my own driveway. I don't see how it's any different than my neighbor's boat or another's trailer." A woman on the board, Linda, looked at her papers and replied, "We've had complaints that it looks unprofessional and doesn't fit the community aesthetic." Tom frowned. "Complaints from who?" Linda gave a tight smile. "We can't disclose that information." That was the moment Tom realized someone nearby had decided to start a problem. He went home that night and pulled out the HOA's rules and covenants. He read every line carefully until he found the section that supposedly applied. It said, "No commercial or industrial vehicle shall be parked or stored on any lot in public view." There was nothing in the document defining what industrial meant. That loophole was his first clue that the rule was vague and open to interpretation. The next day, Tom walked around the neighborhood with his phone, snapping photos. He took pictures of the boat parked across the street, the trailer 2 houses down, and a contractor's van parked overnight. If his tractor counted as industrial, so did half of those. A few days later, he mailed the HOA a formal letter. In it, he included the photos and asked for clarification on how his tractor was different. He printed the section of the covenant and highlighted the missing definition. For a week, he heard nothing. Then one afternoon, he came home from work and found another paper taped to his garage door. This one said he was now being fined $300 for continued noncompliance. The letter warned that further action could include a hearing or legal measures. Tom stood in his driveway, staring at the paper, shaking his head. He looked over at his tractor, quiet, parked neatly, covered with a tarp. It wasn't hurting anyone. He felt anger rising. The HOA wasn't just trying to enforce a rule. They were trying to control him. Tom decided that night he wasn't going to give in. He was going to fight back with their own documents, their own words, and his right to use his property the way it was intended. He made coffee, sat at his kitchen table, and started writing his next letter, the one that would turn this small disagreement into a full-blown HOA battle. Tom sat at his kitchen table late into the night, the HOA letter spread out beside his coffee cup. He read it over and over, feeling that mix of disbelief and anger that comes when something unfair happens, but you know you're right. He wasn't about to let a handful of board members tell him what he could park on his own driveway. The next morning, he typed a formal response. He addressed it to the HOA board, referencing their previous notice. He wrote, "The vehicle in question is a compact agricultural tractor used exclusively for property maintenance. It is not commercial, industrial, or used for business purposes." He attached pictures showing that the tractor was clean, properly stored, and even covered with a fitted tarp. Then he added the key line, "If the board intends to classify this vehicle as industrial, please provide the written definition as found in the HOA's governing documents." He sent it certified mail, so they couldn't claim they hadn't received it. A week passed. No response. Then another letter arrived. Not from the HOA this time, but from their attorney. It stated that Tom's refusal to comply could result in a lien against his property. The tone was sharp, almost threatening. Tom read it twice and laughed under his breath. They were serious. He called his friend Rick, a retired county code inspector who lived 2 roads over. Rick listened to the story and chuckled. "They can't just make up their own definitions," he said. "If it's not in the bylaws, they've got nothing. You might want to show up at that hearing and make them explain themselves." Sure enough, 2 days later, Tom got an official notice to attend a violation hearing at the clubhouse. It was scheduled for the following Thursday evening. He gathered his notes, photos, and a printed copy of the entire HOA covenant. He even printed out a few county zoning definitions that proved his tractor was classified as residential agricultural equipment, not industrial machinery. When the day came, Tom arrived early. The board members sat behind a folding table, neat stacks of papers in front of them. The same woman, Linda, who had spoken before, acted as chairperson. Carla from the office sat to one side taking notes. Linda began, "Mr. Miller, this meeting concerns your continued violation of Article 4B. Do you understand the nature of the complaint?" Tom nodded. "Yes, I understand it perfectly. The issue is that you're misclassifying my tractor as industrial. I've reviewed the documents, and there's no definition to support that." Another board member, Harold, cleared his throat. "Sir, the community standards are designed to maintain visual harmony. Some neighbors feel the presence of heavy machinery disrupts that." Tom opened his folder and slid a printed photo across the table. "This boat has been sitting in front of 217 Maple Drive for 4 months. This landscaping trailer hasn't moved in 2. Are those considered heavy machinery?" The room went quiet. Linda shifted uncomfortably before replying, "Those situations are being reviewed separately." Tom leaned back in his chair. "So, it's selective enforcement then?" Nobody answered. Carla just kept writing. After 20 minutes of back-and-forth discussion, Tom made his closing statement. "You can't fine me for something that's not clearly defined in your rules. If you want to make a rule against tractors, put it in writing and vote on it. Until then, I'm not removing it." He gathered his papers and left the meeting calmly, though inside he was boiling. 2 days later, he received another notice in the mail. The fines were temporarily suspended, pending review. That meant they didn't know what to do next. Tom smiled. He had bought himself time. That weekend, he decided to clean up the tractor even more, repainting the faded hood and parking it neatly near the barn. He even built a small wooden screen around it using leftover fencing material, just to show he wasn't unreasonable. He figured if they wanted it out of view, this would satisfy them. A few evenings later, while Tom was sitting on his porch, he saw a white SUV stop near his driveway. A woman stepped out, took a photo of the tractor, and quickly left. He recognized her as Margaret, one of the HOA board members. That confirmed it. Someone on the board was personally pushing this issue. Tom wasn't going to let them win. He spent the next few days gathering even more evidence. Copies of the HOA rules, photos of similar vehicles, and documentation from the county zoning office. He was building a full case, one that would make it clear that the HOA had no authority to dictate how he used his own property. The following week, Tom sent a final certified letter stating that continued harassment over the tractor would be considered selective enforcement and a breach of the HOA's own governing obligations. He also mentioned that he was prepared to involve legal counsel if the matter wasn't resolved fairly. Then he sat back, waiting for their next move, knowing that this battle with the HOA was far from over. Tom didn't hear anything from the HOA for nearly 2 weeks after sending that certified letter. The silence felt strange. Every day, when he walked out to get the mail, he half expected another notice or a threat of a lien. But all he found were bills, catalogs, and the usual flyers. It almost felt peaceful again. He went back to his regular routine, working during the week and taking care of his property on weekends. The tractor sat quietly behind the wooden screen he had built, freshly painted and neatly parked. Then one morning, as he was pouring coffee, he heard a knock on the door. When he opened it, 2 sheriff's deputies were standing there. The taller one introduced himself politely. "Mr. Miller, we received a call from your homeowners association. They claim there's an unregistered vehicle being stored on your property." Tom blinked, almost laughing. "You're talking about my tractor?" The deputy nodded. "We just need to verify that it's not violating any county regulations." Tom led them around the house and showed the tractor. It was spotless, parked properly, and even had a visible serial plate showing the registration number. The deputies looked it over for less than a minute. One of them said, "This is residential equipment. You're not breaking any laws." They thanked him for his time and left. Tom stood there in the driveway, shaking his head. The HOA had actually called the police over a tractor. That moment changed everything. What had started as an annoyance was now personal. That afternoon, he went to the county records office to request copies of all zoning definitions and local property use regulations. The clerk helped him print the pages showing clear language that small-scale agricultural vehicles were allowed on residential lots of more than 2 acres. His property met that requirement easily. He stapled the papers together and drove straight to the HOA office. Inside, Carla sat behind the desk, as usual. She looked uncomfortable when Tom placed the documents in front of her. "Carla, you can tell whoever keeps filing these complaints that I've already been checked by law enforcement. The county confirmed I'm not in violation of anything. Here's the paperwork." Carla nodded nervously. "I'll pass it on to the board." Tom left without another word. That evening, he received an email from Linda, the board chair. It was short and formal. "The board acknowledges your recent communication. We will review your documentation and respond accordingly." Days passed again. Then, during the next HOA meeting, Linda made an announcement in front of several residents. "We have reviewed the matter involving Mr. Miller's vehicle. While we continue to encourage all residents to maintain community appearance standards, no further action will be taken at this time." Tom was sitting near the back of the room. He didn't say anything, but inside, he knew he'd won that round. A few of the neighbors gave him quiet nods. Others avoided eye contact, probably realizing how ridiculous the situation had become. After the meeting ended, one of his neighbors, Bill, came up to him. "You handled that well," he said. "They tried to fine me for having my trailer too close to the road last year. You just proved they can't bully everyone." Tom smiled. Someone has to stand up to them. The following week, life went back to normal. The tractor remained where it was, the fine stopped, and the board seemed to back off. But Tom wasn't about to forget what they tried to do. He spent a few evenings writing a detailed summary of everything that had happened. Every letter, every notice, every conversation. He kept copies of all the correspondence and stored them in a binder labeled HOA case file. A month later, though, another letter arrived. This time, it wasn't a violation notice. It was an invitation. The HOA was holding elections for 2 open board seats. The note encouraged all residents to participate. Tom read it twice, and a small smile spread across his face. That night, he filled out the form and submitted his name as a candidate for one of the open positions. He figured if the HOA wanted to make rules, he might as well be part of the group writing them. When election day came, Tom walked to the clubhouse and cast his vote. A few of his neighbors greeted him warmly, saying they supported him. They'd seen how calmly and reasonably he had handled the whole ordeal. By the end of the week, the results were posted on the HOA bulletin board. Tom Miller had been elected as a new board member. He looked at his name, printed on the paper, and felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The same group that once tried to fine him for owning a tractor had just voted him into their ranks. From that day on, Tom promised himself one thing. He'd never let the HOA pull something like that on anyone else again. Tom attended his first HOA board meeting as an official member the following month. He arrived early, carrying a notepad and a calm determination that came from weeks of frustration and reflection. The same long folding table sat at the front of the clubhouse, and the same faces turned when he walked in. Linda gave a polite but tense smile, and Harold barely looked up from his papers. When the meeting started, Tom listened quietly as they went through the usual topics: landscaping contracts, budget allocations, and minor complaints about paint colors and mailboxes. He waited patiently until the end, then raised his hand. "Before we adjourn," he said, "I'd like to bring up an issue regarding the clarity of our covenant definitions, specifically the section about vehicles." The room went silent for a moment. Linda sighed, but nodded for him to continue. Tom opened a binder filled with documents. "Over the past months, we've had unnecessary conflict because of vague terminology in our rules. Words like industrial or unsightly are open to interpretation. That's not how a fair system should operate. If we're going to enforce something, it needs to be defined clearly and applied equally." One of the newer board members, Janet, nodded. "He's right. I've had residents call about inconsistent enforcement before. We can't just rely on personal opinions." Harold crossed his arms. "We can't allow the neighborhood to start looking like a storage yard either." Tom replied evenly, "I agree, Harold, but enforcing vague rules only creates more problems. I'm not asking for chaos. I'm asking for consistency." They debated for nearly an hour. In the end, the board voted to form a small committee to review and clarify the language in the community bylaws. Tom volunteered to lead it. It was a small victory, but it mattered. For once, change was moving in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, Tom spent his evenings going through every section of the HOA document, rewriting parts that had caused issues in the past. He reached out to residents for feedback, asking what rules they found confusing or unfair. People were hesitant at first, but when they realized Tom genuinely wanted to improve things, they began to open up. He met with Sarah, a widow who'd been fined for having her grandson's pickup parked in her driveway. He spoke to George, a retired mechanic who'd been told to remove his tool shed because it didn't match his house color. Each story sounded familiar: small, harmless situations blown out of proportion by unnecessary control. Tom brought all these examples to the next meeting and presented them clearly. "We're supposed to keep the neighborhood organized, not intimidate the people who live here," he said. These rules were meant to protect property value, not make life miserable. The more he spoke, the more heads nodded. Even Linda seemed to soften a little. She admitted that the previous board had relied heavily on complaints without verifying whether the rules truly applied. By the third month, the committee drafted a new set of amendments. The language around vehicles now read: residential, agricultural, or maintenance equipment, when properly maintained and used for property care, shall not be classified as industrial. It was the exact definition Tom had fought for. When the amendments were finalized, they were posted on the HOA bulletin board for all residents to review and vote on. During the community meeting, a surprising number of homeowners showed up, more than the HOA had seen in years. Many of them thanked Tom in person. When the vote concluded, the amendments passed with overwhelming support. The HOA would now operate under clearer, fairer guidelines. After the meeting, Tom walked out of the clubhouse into the cool evening air. He looked down the quiet street lined with porches and trees. For the first time in months, he felt genuine peace about living there. The next morning, he went outside, started up his tractor, and drove it down the gravel path to spread a load of fresh gravel on his driveway. No one complained. No one stared. A couple of neighbors waved as they passed. Later that afternoon, Linda stopped by his driveway. "I have to admit," she said, "you handled this better than I expected. I think we needed someone to challenge the system a little." Tom smiled faintly. "All I ever wanted was to be treated fairly. I think that's all any of us want." She nodded. "Well, You got your rule change. Maybe now we can move on from all this. Tom looked over at his tractor, shining in the sunlight. That's the plan. From that day forward, things in the neighborhood settled down. The HOA became more transparent, residents stopped living in fear of fines, and meetings turned into real discussions instead of lectures. Tom had turned a petty conflict into meaningful reform. Every time he looked at his tractor, he didn't just see a piece of equipment anymore. He saw proof that standing your ground calmly and logically could make a difference, even in a place ruled by endless letters and rules. Months passed, and life in the neighborhood finally found its rhythm again. The air felt lighter, quieter, as if the constant tension between the HOA and homeowners had faded. People started talking to each other again, waving from their driveways, sharing small updates about their gardens, pets, and families. For the first time in years, the HOA meetings were calm. Tom had managed to turn something that once caused resentment into something that actually served the community. But peace rarely lasts forever. One crisp Saturday morning, Tom was loading hay into the small trailer hitched behind his tractor when his neighbor Bill walked over. "Hey, Tom," he said, lowering his voice. "You heard what they're planning?" Tom looked up. "Who's they?" "The old board members, the ones who lost their seats. Linda told me they've been talking about bringing in a stricter property management firm to handle enforcement. Apparently, some folks still think things are getting too relaxed." Tom frowned. He thought the reform had settled everything. But in every HOA, there were always a few people who couldn't stand not having control. "Thanks for the heads up," he said. That night, Tom reviewed the HOA budget and the management contract. Sure enough, the board had the authority to hire an external firm for enforcement if a majority voted for it. He knew they could undo months of work. Outside firms didn't care about fairness. They cared about fees and violations. When the next meeting arrived, the room was packed. Linda opened the session and announced the proposal. "We've received offers from 2 professional property management companies that could help us maintain community standards and handle enforcement impartially." Tom stood immediately. "With all due respect, the residents didn't ask for that. We've built trust by keeping enforcement local and transparent. Outsourcing, it means strangers will start policing our driveways again." A murmur went through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement. Others looked uncertain. Harold, still a board member, spoke next. "We need consistency, Tom. You've done a good job, but not everyone follows the rules like you do." Tom opened his folder and pulled out a chart he'd prepared. "Since we redefined the bylaws, violations dropped by 70%. Complaints went down by half. People are happier. Why fix what's finally working?" Janet backed him up. "We don't need another layer of bureaucracy. We can handle this ourselves." The debate lasted nearly 2 hours. It was calm but firm, and for every argument the old board tried to make, Tom had facts ready to counter them. He showed survey results from residents, photos of well-kept properties, and financial records proving the HOA saved thousands since the reforms. When it came time to vote, Linda hesitated before saying, "All in favor of hiring an external management firm?" Only 2 hands went up, Harold's and one of the former board members who had recently returned. "All opposed?" Linda asked. Every other hand, including her own, was raised. The motion failed. Afterward, people lingered to shake Tom's hand. One woman said, "You've done more for this place in a year than the HOA has in a decade." He smiled and thanked her, but kept his response simple. He wasn't interested in praise. He was just relieved that reason had won again. As the crowd thinned, Linda approached. "I'll admit, I didn't expect you to stick with this as long as you have," she said quietly. Tom replied, "I didn't plan to. But once you see how much a few bad decisions can affect good people, you can't just walk away." She nodded. Maybe that's what we all needed, someone who actually cares. After the meeting, Tom walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and would smoke from someone's chimney. When he reached his driveway, he paused for a moment, looking at his tractor resting beside the barn. It was quiet now, like it had been waiting for him to come home. Over the next few months, Tom continued serving on the board. He introduced new projects that encouraged neighbors to work together instead of against each other. A community garden, shared tool exchanges, and seasonal cleanup days. People started showing pride in their neighborhood again, not because they were afraid of fines, but because they felt ownership of it. By the end of the year, the HOA had a reputation for being one of the most cooperative in the county. New families moved in, drawn by the sense of freedom and fairness that Tom had helped create. One morning, as Tom was fixing the gate near his barn, Bill stopped by again and said, "Hard to believe this all started over that old tractor." Tom smiled. "Yeah, funny how a simple fight can turn into something bigger." Bill laughed. "You proved something to all of us, that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to step right into it." Tom nodded, tightening the last bolt on the gate. "Guess that's true. You either complain about the rules or help rewrite them." He looked down the driveway, the sun catching the edge of the tractor's green paint. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a reminder of every letter, every meeting, every stand he'd taken. The HOA still had rules, but now they made sense. The neighbors still had disagreements, but now they talked them out. And for Tom, life on his little ranch finally felt the way it was meant to: peaceful, fair, and completely his own. Winter came early that year, coating the neighborhood in a soft blanket of snow. The air was crisp, and the hills around Tom's property glowed silver under the morning light. Most people stayed indoors, but Tom didn't mind the cold. He enjoyed it. It reminded him of why he'd bought the place in the first place: space, quiet, and the freedom to work his land the way he wanted. On a Saturday morning, he bundled up, stepped into his boots, and started his tractor. The familiar rumble echoed across the yard as he attached the snow blade to the front. For the next few hours, he cleared his driveway and helped two of his neighbors who were stuck trying to shovel out their cars. It had become a bit of a routine now. When it snowed, Tom would go around and clear the main paths for people. Nobody asked him to, but everyone appreciated it. Later that afternoon, as he was putting the tractor away, he saw an unfamiliar SUV pull up near his driveway. A woman in a long coat stepped out, holding a clipboard. "Mr. Miller?" she asked. Tom nodded. "That's me. I'm Evelyn Carter from Carter Property Services. I've been hired by the HOA for an independent assessment of community compliance. Just routine, nothing personal." Tom felt his chest tighten. "We voted against bringing in outside management," he said firmly. Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm not management. I'm just conducting a short inspection. I was told it's standard annual procedure." He knew exactly what was happening. Someone had found another loophole. "You're free to look around from the street," he said evenly. "But this is private property. You can't come past the fence without permission." She nodded, but kept writing on her clipboard, eyes scanning the yard. Tom could feel irritation boiling beneath his calm expression. He waited until she left before calling Janet. Janet answered quickly. "I've heard about it," she said. "Apparently, Harold pushed through a motion while most of us were out last month. It was presented as a one-time compliance review. We're going to fix it at the next meeting." Tom sighed. "He's not giving up." "Don't worry," Janet said. "You've got most of the board and half the neighborhood on your side now." That night, Tom drafted another report. He wrote down everything that had happened: the unannounced inspection, the conversation, the name of the company. He'd learned to document everything. Over the next few days, several neighbors called him with similar stories. Evelyn had stopped at their homes too, snapping photos, asking questions, measuring sheds. People were upset, confused, and worried the old HOA habits were coming back. When the next board meeting came around, the room was full again. Snow clung to boots and coats as residents packed into the clubhouse. Harold sat stiffly at the table, pretending to read notes. Linda was there too, looking uneasy. Tom stood up first. "Before we discuss anything else, I'd like to address the recent property inspections," he began. "Residents were not informed, consent was not requested, and these actions violated our new bylaws. I have 15 written statements from homeowners who were visited without notice." He placed a folder on the table. Murmurs filled the room. Harold cleared his throat. "Those inspections were authorized under Section 8, Paragraph 3. They're legal." Tom replied calmly. "They may be legal, but they're not ethical, and they're not what this community agreed to. We voted against outside enforcement. If you want to run this neighborhood like a corporation, you're in the wrong place." The crowd applauded quietly. Linda leaned forward. I think Tom's right. We can't rebuild trust and then tear it down again. Let's call a vote. When the ballots were counted, the result was clear. The motion to hire outside assessors was revoked, and Harold's authority to approve such actions alone was stripped. He didn't say a word. After the meeting, several neighbors came up to Tom, thanking him again. One of them, George, said, "You've done more than just fight them off. You made them listen." Tom smiled. "I just don't like bullies, George. Never have." The next morning, he went out to his barn, brushed the snow off the tractor's hood, and looked out over his land. The sky was pale blue, the trees dusted white. It was peaceful again, not because the HOA had disappeared, but because the community had finally learned where the line was. Over the following weeks, things truly settled. Letters stopped showing up, neighbors worked together to clear snow and repair fences, and the tension that once hung over the place seemed to fade completely. Tom spent his evenings sitting by the wood stove, reading or tinkering with small projects. Every now and then, he'd glance at the thick folder of HOA papers on his desk, his personal archive of every battle, every decision, every lesson. He didn't plan to use it again, but he wasn't getting rid of it either. It reminded him of how far things had come, from a single complaint about a tractor to a community that finally understood fairness, cooperation, and respect. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees. Tom smiled to himself, poured another cup of coffee, and felt, for the first time in years, completely at home. Spring came early the next year. The snow melted fast, and the quiet hum of lawnmowers replaced the sound of plows and snowblowers. Flowers bloomed across the neighborhood, and the fields behind Tom's house turned green again. For once, everything seemed calm. The HOA was running smoothly, neighbors were cooperating, and nobody was arguing about fences, driveways, or vehicles. Tom woke up early one Saturday, made his coffee, and stepped outside to start his usual morning work. The sun was warm, the birds loud, and his tractor gleamed under a fresh coat of wax he'd applied the day before. He hooked up the trailer to haul some mulch to his garden. Halfway through loading, he saw a small car pull up by the mailbox. A young man stepped out, carrying a folder. "Morning, sir. I'm Ethan with Fairview Realty. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Tom set down his shovel. "What's this about?" Ethan smiled. "We're preparing updated property value assessments for the community. The HOA authorized us to review improvements, additions, and overall land use." Tom's expression hardened slightly. "So now they're doing appraisals too?" Ethan looked uneasy. "Just standard procedure. Nothing invasive." Tom nodded slowly. "Sure, but you'll stay on the public side of the fence." Ethan agreed, took a few quick notes, and left within minutes. Tom didn't think much of it until later that week, when several neighbors mentioned receiving letters from potential buyers, unsolicited offers to purchase their homes. It seemed strange. No one had listed their property, yet someone clearly wanted to buy multiple houses in the same area. At the next HOA meeting, Tom brought it up. "Several residents, including me, have been approached with purchase offers. Does anyone know who authorized this?" The room went quiet. Linda looked surprised. "The HOA didn't authorize anything beyond maintenance reporting." "Are you sure these offers are real?" Tom held up one of the letters. "This one came from a development company in the city. It mentions plans for future expansion near the community. Someone is trying to buy us out." The members exchanged uneasy glances. Harold, who still sat quietly at the end of the table, avoided eye contact. Tom noticed. "Harold," Tom said evenly, "you seem to know something about this." Harold shifted in his chair. "I may have spoken with a development representative months ago. They asked general questions about zoning and infrastructure. I didn't think it was important." Tom leaned forward. "It's important if they're trying to turn our neighborhood into a business opportunity." The discussion grew tense. Some members were worried that development might increase property values, while others feared losing the peace that had finally returned. Tom remained calm, but firm. "We've worked too hard to protect our rights here. If we let a developer in, we lose everything we fought for." By the end of the meeting, they voted to send an official notice to all residents warning them not to engage with outside buyers until the matter was investigated. Over the next week, Tom dug deeper. He visited the county zoning office again, pulling records of proposed land development in the area. Sure enough, a company named Silver Pine Estates LLC had submitted an early proposal to rezone part of the adjacent farmland, property bordering their community. If the project went through, it could bring new roads, heavy traffic, and possibly new restrictions. That evening, Tom invited a few neighbors over, Bill, Janet, and George among them. They sat in his kitchen, papers spread out on the table. "So this company wants to buy out parts of our neighborhood," Janet said. "For what? More houses?" Tom nodded. "High-density housing. The proposal calls it Phase 1 of the Silver Pine expansion." Bill rubbed his chin. "That means they try to merge us into it eventually." "Exactly," Tom said. "And that's why we need to make sure this community stays independent." Over the next few days, Tom drafted a detailed report summarizing everything: the unsolicited offers, the zoning request, and the potential consequences. He attached signatures from 20 residents opposing any sale or rezoning. When the next county planning meeting was held, he stood at the podium and presented it. He spoke calmly, explaining that the neighborhood was privately maintained, financially stable, and had no interest in being absorbed by a larger development. Several of his neighbors stood beside him as he spoke. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. The proposal wasn't denied on the spot, but the county board postponed it for review, a quiet victory that bought them time. As Tom drove home that evening, the setting sun lit up the fields around his ranch. He looked at his land. The same driveway, the same tractor, the same quiet peace he'd fought to keep. He realized that the battles never really ended. They just changed shape. But this time, he wasn't alone. The whole neighborhood stood with him now. For the first time, it wasn't just his fight. It was their community, and they were ready to protect it. Summer rolled in fast that year, bringing long, golden days and the steady hum of cicadas that filled the evenings. The community had settled into a new rhythm again. The Silver Pine Estates proposal hadn't been approved yet, and the HOA members stayed alert. Most residents felt confident that their neighborhood was safe for now. Tom, though, knew better. He'd dealt with enough bureaucratic surprises to know that peace often meant someone was planning something quietly in the background. One morning, as he sat on his porch drinking coffee, a pickup truck pulled up. A man in a collared shirt stepped out, wearing sunglasses and holding a folder under his arm. "Mr. Miller?" Tom stood up. "That's me. Name's Greg Porter. I represent Silver Pine Estates. I was hoping we could talk." Tom kept his voice calm. "About what?" Greg smiled politely. "We're revising our proposal. We understand the community's concerns, and we're open to compromise. We'd like to offer incentives to homeowners who are willing to sell early, above market prices, full relocation coverage, even assistance with finding new properties." Tom looked him straight in the eye. "We're not interested in selling. Not me, not my neighbors." Greg nodded, pretending to understand. "Of course. But change is coming to this area one way or another. We just want to make sure you benefit from it." Tom didn't respond. He simply said, "You can leave your card," then turned back toward the house. After Greg left, Tom called Janet. "They're back," he said. She groaned. "Unbelievable. They just won't give up." That afternoon, Tom printed flyers for every mailbox in the community. The message was short. "Notice, representatives from Silver Pine Estates are visiting homeowners again. Do not sign or agree to any offers. The HOA board will meet Friday evening to discuss next steps." By Friday, the clubhouse was packed. Everyone had heard about the visits. Some were angry. Others were nervous. A few were even tempted by the offers. Tom stood before them. "I know some of you are thinking that selling might be easier, but you need to understand what that means. If they buy enough lots, they'll take over our zoning rights. They'll change our roads, our land rules, and our taxes. This won't be our neighborhood anymore." A man in the back, Paul, one of the newer residents, raised his hand. "But what if they really pay double? Some of us could use that money." Tom nodded. "I get that, Paul. But once you sell, it's gone. You won't get to choose what replaces this. You'll see bulldozers where kids play. You'll hear construction noise instead of birds. And in the end, they'll make more profit off your land than you ever got from it." The room was silent for a long moment. Then Janet spoke up. "We can't let them divide us. That's how they win." Linda added, "We can issue a community covenant, a collective agreement preventing the sale of individual lots to corporate developers without a two-thirds neighborhood vote. Tom nodded. Let's draft it tonight. They worked for hours, reviewing legal templates, adjusting language, and finalizing signatures. By the end of the meeting, nearly every homeowner had signed the covenant. It wasn't perfect, but it was enforceable, and it gave them protection. The following week, Greg returned, this time knocking on doors again. But this time, every homeowner handed him a copy of the covenant. Some even closed the door without another word. Within days, the visits stopped. Weeks passed quietly. Kids rode bikes down the street, lawns were freshly cut, and the neighborhood felt alive again. But Tom wasn't celebrating yet. He still checked the county bulletin every few days. And sure enough, one afternoon, he saw it. A revised notice from Silver Pine Estates. They had filed a new zoning application, this time attempting to develop land just outside the neighborhood boundary. Tom shook his head. They weren't trying to buy the community anymore. They were trying to surround it. He gathered the board again that evening. They've changed tactics, he said. They're planning construction right along the east border. If they build there, we'll have traffic runoff and noise coming straight through. Janet exhaled. So what do we do now? Tom leaned over the table. We go to the Planning Commission again. But this time we go prepared. We'll get environmental studies, impact reports, and signatures from everyone here. Over the next few weeks, Tom worked nonstop. He met with local officials, gathered evidence of wildlife habitats near the border, and documented drainage risks that the developers hadn't accounted for. When the next county meeting came, he and nearly 50 residents attended. Tom stood before the board once again, calm and steady. We're not against progress, he said. We're against losing our home to it. This land was meant for families, not corporations. The crowd cheered quietly behind him. The commissioners listened carefully. By the end of the session, they voted to delay the zoning approval again, pending further review. Another temporary victory, but one that showed the developers they weren't going to win easily. That night, as Tom returned home, his porch light flickered across the tractor parked by the barn. The air was warm and still, the sound of frogs echoing from the creek. He took a deep breath, feeling both tired and proud. The fight wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But every step of the way, the neighborhood had grown stronger, united by something more powerful than property lines or paperwork. They'd learned what it meant to stand together. By the time autumn rolled around, the air had cooled again and the leaves had started to turn deep shades of red and gold. It had been almost a full year since Tom first stood up to the HOA, and the neighborhood had changed in more ways than anyone could have predicted. What used to be a quiet cluster of houses managed by a strict board was now a community with pride and backbone. But the peace they'd earned was once again being tested. One morning, while Tom was fixing the fence near his barn, a county maintenance truck stopped by the edge of the property. A man in a reflective vest stepped out and began marking the ground with orange paint. Tom walked over. What's going on? The man glanced up. Survey work. Preparing for a new road expansion. Tom frowned. There's no road planned here. You sure you've got the right place? The man checked his clipboard. According to the county, a connecting access route is being proposed, part of the Silver Pine Estates development. Tom's jaw tightened. He thanked the worker and immediately called Janet. Within hours, the HOA board was meeting again. The tension in the room was heavy. They can't build a road through here without approval, Janet said, flipping through the bylaws. Linda replied, if the land belongs to the county and they grant access to the developer, it doesn't matter what we say. Tom leaned forward. Then we have to show them that road isn't viable. We'll prove it's unsafe, flood risk, wildlife corridor, you name it. They spent the next week gathering everything they could. Tom mapped out drainage patterns. Janet took photos of the narrow slopes, and George contacted the environmental department about the protected creek nearby. By the end of the week, they had a 30-page report detailing why the new road would damage the area. The next county meeting was crowded. Representatives from Silver Pine Estates sat in suits at the front, while Tom and nearly the entire neighborhood filled the back rows. When it was Tom's turn to speak, he stood tall, holding the binder of reports in one hand. This road won't just cut through private property, he said. It will destroy a protected creek bed, disrupt drainage, and create traffic hazards for our residents. We're not opposing development out of spite. We're doing it because it's the right thing to do. He handed over the report, and the board members quietly leafed through it. One of the commissioners looked up. "Mr. Miller, your research is thorough. We'll need time to review these findings before moving forward." Tom nodded. "That's all we ask." After the meeting, as people were filing out, Greg Porter, the developer's representative, caught up with him outside. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," Greg said, his tone a mix of irritation and respect. Tom turned toward him. "I'm not persistent, Greg. I just care about what's mine." Greg smirked. "You can't fight progress forever." Tom smiled slightly. "Maybe not, but I can make sure it doesn't run me over on its way through." Over the next few weeks, rumors spread that Silver Pine Estates was running out of patience and money. Their investors had expected easy land purchases and quick approvals. Instead, they faced community pushback, legal reviews, and public scrutiny. Then, one crisp October morning, Tom got a call from the county office. The road proposal had been officially denied. The developer's zoning request was withdrawn. Silver Pine Estates had quietly ended their bid to expand near the neighborhood. Tom didn't say much, just thanked the clerk and hung up. He walked outside, the morning sun glinting off the frost on his fields. The air smelled like pine and wood smoke. That evening, the entire community gathered for an impromptu cookout in the park. Kids ran around laughing, neighbors brought food, and for the first time in a long while, there wasn't a single tense word about bylaws, letters, or meetings. Linda raised a glass and said, "To Tom, the man who reminded us what community really means." Tom shook his head. "It wasn't me. It was all of us." The crowd cheered anyway. Later that night, as the fire burned low and most people headed home, Tom stayed behind a moment, staring at the stars. Janet joined him quietly. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked. Tom smiled faintly. "Every day. If I just let them tell me what to do, we'd all be living under someone else's rules right now." Janet nodded. "You didn't just protect your driveway, Tom. You protected everyone's sense of home." He looked down the road toward his property, the same road the developers had tried so hard to take over. His tractor sat quietly by the barn, just as it always had. "Funny," he said softly. "All this started because someone didn't like where I parked." Janet laughed. "And it ended with us keeping our freedom." Tom smiled, hands in his pockets, watching the lights fade one by one across the neighborhood. The fight was finally over, but what it left behind was worth every battle. A community that stood tall, together, and unbreakable. Winter returned once more, quiet and steady, blanketing the neighborhood in white. A year had passed since the last showdown with the developers, and the place looked peaceful again. Smoke rising from chimneys, kids building snowmen, and the faint hum of Tom's tractor clearing the roads after every snowfall. Life had settled into a rhythm. There were no more letters, no surprise visits, no unannounced inspections. The HOA meetings had become more like friendly gatherings, where people discussed holiday decorations and snow removal schedules instead of violations and fines. For the first time in years, the community actually felt like one. Tom had stepped down as vice president of the board, choosing to let newer members take charge. He still attended meetings, still helped when needed, but now he had time to focus on his own land again. Most mornings, he spent hours repairing the old barn, replacing beams, and repainting doors. It was the kind of slow, honest work he'd always enjoyed. One morning, as he was working on the roof, he heard the crunch of tires in the snow. Looking down, he saw a black SUV stop at the gate. A woman stepped out, bundled in a long coat. She waved and called out, "Mr. Miller?" He climbed down. "That's me. I'm Rachel Owens, a reporter from the county paper. I've been covering local development issues, and your neighborhood came up a lot in public records. I was wondering if you'd talk about what happened with the HOA and Silver Pine Estates." Tom hesitated. "There's not much to tell anymore. We just stood up for ourselves." Rachel smiled. "That's exactly why it's a story worth telling." He agreed to talk, and they sat on the porch while she took notes. He told her about the first HOA letter, the endless meetings, the petitions, the surveys, and the way the community had pulled together. He didn't exaggerate or make himself the hero. He just told it straight. After she left, Tom didn't think much about it. But 2 weeks later, the story ran on the front page. One man's tractor sparked a community revolution. It spread fast across the county. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate him. Even people from nearby towns reached out, saying they were inspired to push back against unfair HOAs or developers in their own areas. Tom appreciated the support, but he stayed humble. "We didn't do anything special," he told Janet one afternoon as they stood by the fence line. "We just stopped letting other people tell us what to do on our own land." Still, the story had an effect. The county council began reviewing outdated zoning policies. Other neighborhoods contacted their local boards asking for more transparency. A few weeks later, a state representative even visited, asking Tom's opinion on proposed reforms to HOA laws. It was strange. The same man who'd once been threatened with fines for parking his tractor now sat in meetings helping shape community policy. But he didn't let it go to his head. He always said, "I just wanted peace, not power." By late winter, life had fully returned to normal. The holiday lights twinkled along rooftops, and the neighborhood hosted its first ever winter gathering, an idea Janet and Linda came up with to celebrate how far they'd come. People brought food, shared stories, and laughed about the battles they'd once fought so fiercely. At one point, little Emma, George's granddaughter, ran up to Tom and tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Miller, can I sit on your tractor again?" He chuckled. "Of course, but only if you promise not to drive it into the snowbank this time." The crowd laughed, and for a moment, Tom just stood there, looking around at the smiling faces, the glow of the fire pit, and the soft snow falling. Everything he'd fought for, the right to simply live freely and peacefully, was right there in front of him. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Tom walked back to his porch. He looked out across the quiet neighborhood, the lights flickering in the distance. The world was still, except for the faint creak of the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. He thought back to that first letter, the one that told him his tractor violated community standards. It felt like a lifetime ago. That single piece of paper had started something no one could have predicted. Not just a fight, but a movement that made people realize how strong they could be together. Tom smiled faintly, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. "Guess we did all right," he murmured to himself. He turned toward the barn, where his tractor sat under the dim light, silent and steady, just like it had always been. For the first time in years, he felt no tension, no frustration, only peace. The HOA still existed, but it no longer ruled people. The neighborhood still had rules, but they made sense now. And Tom still had his tractor parked exactly where it belonged, in his own driveway, on his own land, where it had been from the very beginning. The fight was over. The lesson remained. And the little community that once almost fell apart had found its strength, all because one man refused to move his tractor. The following spring brought something new to the quiet neighborhood. Not trouble this time, but change of a different kind. The community was thriving. Property values had gone up, not because of developers or outside investors, but because people had taken care of their homes again. The lawns were trimmed, the fences repaired, and the old hostility that used to hang in the air had been replaced with friendliness. Tom had grown used to the peaceful days. He woke up early, had coffee on the porch, and then spent his mornings working on his land. Sometimes he helped George repair his shed or drove the tractor over to clear debris from a neighbor's yard. It had become part of the neighborhood rhythm. Everyone knew that if something broke or needed lifting, Tom would be there. One warm afternoon, as Tom was repairing the barn side door, Linda stopped by. She looked relaxed, smiling in a way he hadn't seen in years. "You got a minute?" she asked. "Always," he said, setting down his hammer. She handed him a folder. "We've been nominated for a county award, the Community Excellence Recognition. Apparently, the local council thinks what we did here is worth celebrating." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You mean standing up to a bunch of overreaching board members and developers?" Linda laughed. "They called it grassroots leadership and civic cooperation. Sounds a little fancier than how it felt at the time." Tom chuckled. "Well, that's something." The ceremony was scheduled for the end of the month. The whole neighborhood voted for Tom to represent them, though he tried to decline at first. It wasn't just me, he said. It was everyone here. But they insisted. So on the evening of the event, he put on his cleanest shirt, dusted off his boots, and drove into town. The county hall was full. Local leaders, business owners, and families from all over. When it was time, Linda introduced him. Sometimes, she said, it only takes one person to remind everyone what fairness looks like. When Tom Miller stood up for his right to use his own land, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for all of us, for the idea that community should mean cooperation, not control. Applause filled the room as Tom walked to the podium. He wasn't much of a speechmaker, but he spoke simply, the same way he always did. I didn't mean to start anything big, he began. I just want to park my tractor in peace. But when people come together for something that matters, things change. We learned that the hard way. We stopped letting rules replace common sense. And we remembered that neighbors aren't supposed to be enemies. The room went silent for a moment. Then everyone stood and clapped. It wasn't loud or showy, just genuine. After the ceremony, Tom drove home under a clear night sky. He parked the truck and sat for a moment, looking at the faint lights of the neighborhood glowing through the trees. It struck him how far everything had come, from angry meetings and letters to awards and recognition. Over the next few weeks, the story spread again. Other HOAs began reaching out, asking for copies of the rewritten bylaws his neighborhood had adopted. Some invited him to speak at their meetings. He turned most of them down politely, but he always replied with one sentence: "You don't need a fight to make change. You just need people willing to stand together." Back home, life went on quietly. The fields were green again, and Tom planted a row of maple trees along the edge of his property. For the future, he told Janet when she asked. Something to last longer than any argument. By midsummer, the trees were already budding, the neighborhood children often running along the fence line to play under their shade. The laughter echoed down the road where, not long ago, angry letters and heated meetings had defined everything. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Bill stopped by with a couple of drinks. They sat on the porch, watching the fading light turn the sky gold. "You ever think about how much this place changed?" Bill asked. Tom nodded. "All the time. We went from rules and threats to community picnics and shared gardens. Guess people just needed to remember what it's like to actually talk to each other." Bill smiled. "You gave them that." Tom shook his head. "No, we gave it to each other." As the crickets started chirping, Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling the quiet peace he'd fought so long to earn. The wind rustled the leaves of the new maples, and he thought about the years ahead, calm, simple, and full of the life they'd built with their own hands. For the first time in a long while, he didn't worry about what might come next. The neighborhood didn't need saving anymore. It was strong enough to stand on its own, rooted deep, like the trees he'd just planted, steady against whatever storms might come. The following year began quietly, the way good years should. The storms were mild, the crops grew well, and the little neighborhood that once fought over rules now gathered for barbecues, birthdays, and long summer nights under the open sky. Tom had grown older, his hair grayer, but his spirit hadn't changed. He still woke before dawn, brewed his coffee, and stepped out to the porch to watch the sun rise over the field. His tractor sat where it always had, clean, steady, and waiting. The same driveway that once started a neighborhood feud had become a symbol of everything they'd built together. It was early spring when the county officially recognized the community's new charter. The bylaws Tom had helped rewrite, the ones that restored fairness and respect, were now being used as a model for other small neighborhoods across the county. Linda called him that morning to share the news. "We did it, Tom," she said, her voice full of pride. Tom smiled. "No, you all did it. I just refused to move my tractor." They both laughed. Later that week, Tom decided to host one last gathering. Not for meetings, not for arguments, but for celebration. He sent out simple invitations to every house in the neighborhood. "Join me at the barn this Saturday. Bring food, bring friends, bring stories. No speeches, just good company." By sunset that Saturday, the yard was alive with laughter and the smell of barbecue. Kids ran through the grass, chasing each other with glow sticks. Neighbors sat on folding chairs, swapping stories about how they'd all met, how far things had come. Music played softly from an old speaker by the barn. Linda approached Tom with a plate of food and handed him a drink. "You realize this is the first time we've all gathered here without a single complaint?" Tom grinned. "Took us long enough." Janet joined them, smiling. "You changed this place, Tom. Before you, it was rules, fines, and fear. Now it's community. People care again." Tom looked around at everyone. The kids laughing, Bill tending the grill, George telling tall tales by the fire pit. "I didn't change it," he said quietly. "It just needed a reminder of what being neighbors is supposed to mean." As the night deepened, the lights from the barn cast a warm glow over the field. Someone started singing softly. Others joined in. The sound of laughter carried through the cool evening air. It felt timeless, like the kind of night people would remember years from now. When the last of the guests had left and the fire had burned low, Tom stood alone for a moment, looking over the land. The moonlight reflected off the tractor's polished frame. He walked over and rested a hand on its hood, feeling the cold metal beneath his palm. "This old thing caused a lot of noise," he said to himself. "But maybe it was just what we needed." He looked toward the road where, years ago, HOA members had once stood taking pictures and writing complaints. Now it was quiet, no signs, no threats, no outsiders waiting to control what didn't belong to them. Just peace. A few months later, a letter arrived in Tom's mailbox. Not from the HOA, but from the county council. It thanked him for his contributions to local policy and for setting an example of citizen-led community reform. They invited him to attend a regional meeting to share his story. He smiled as he read it, then folded the letter neatly and set it aside. He didn't plan to go. He didn't need another meeting or another award. The results were already here, in every smile, every wave from a passing neighbor, every child playing safely in a yard once restricted by rules. As summer came again, the maples he'd planted had grown taller, their leaves rustling softly in the warm breeze. He spent most evenings sitting under them, watching the sun dip low behind the hills. One evening, as the light faded and the cicadas began their steady chorus, Janet stopped by for a visit. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while before she said, "You ever think about how this might have gone if you'd just given in back then?" Tom chuckled. "All the time. But then I remember what would have been lost. Not just my tractor, but everything that came after." She nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How something so small can change everything." Tom smiled softly. That's how life works. Big things start small, a single voice, a single choice, sometimes a single machine parked in the wrong place. The sun dipped below the trees, and the world turned quiet again. The porch light flickered on, the fields glowed in silver moonlight, and the air was still. Tom leaned back in his chair, content. He'd fought his battles, earned his peace, and left behind something stronger than any rulebook, a neighborhood that remembered what it meant to be free, fair, and united. The fight was long over now, but its lesson would last. And so, on that quiet evening, with the stars shining above and his tractor resting faithfully beside the barn, Tom Miller closed his eyes, smiled, and let the peace he'd fought for settle in, once and for all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to Zarela HOA Stories for more real-life tales of homeowners, neighborhoods, and the battles that bring communities together.